3,000 years of perfection hung on the walls of the Grand Hall. Blades of every shape and size, forged by master smiths from 100 worlds, each one preserved behind shimmering energy fields. Cadets from 12 different species filled the stone benches, their eyes fixed on the center of the hall where Grandmaster Torvin prepared for the sacred demonstration. Ravi Dasgupta sat in the back row, trying to make himself small. He was the only human in the room, and he could feel the curious stares. Some were simply interested. Others carried the weight of judgment. Humans had joined the Galactic Coalition only 40 years ago. To species that measured their histories in millennia, humanity was still the new arrival at an ancient gathering. Grandmaster Torvin was impossible to ignore. 8 feet tall, with gray leathery skin and 4 powerful arms, the Keldari instructor moved with a grace that seemed wrong for someone so large. He had taught blade combat at this academy for over 200 years. Every movement he made carried the weight of tradition. Today, Torvin announced, his deep voice filling the hall without effort, "You will witness the 5 sacred forms. These techniques have remained unchanged since the first Keldari Empire. They represent the peak of blade mastery." He gestured to an assistant, who carefully brought forward a long case made of dark wood. When Torvin opened it, the cadets leaned forward. Inside lay a blade of extraordinary beauty. The metal seemed to flow like frozen water, and ancient symbols ran along its length. This blade was forged for the warrior king Aldrin himself, Torvin said with obvious pride. It has been preserved for 3,000 years as the perfect example of Keldari craftsmanship. Watch closely. The Grandmaster lifted the blade and began the first form. His 4 arms moved in complex patterns, the blade singing through the air. It was beautiful. Even Ravi, who knew nothing of Keldari traditions, could see the years of practice in every motion. But something else caught his attention. Ravi had held swords since he was 6 years old. His grandfather had been a fencing master in Mumbai, and Ravi had spent his childhood learning the weight and feel of blades. He had competed at international levels, studied historical European martial arts, trained with Japanese instructors, and handled replicas of weapons from every era of human history. He knew how a blade should move. As Torvin flowed through the second form, Ravi's eyes narrowed. There it was again. A tiny hesitation in the recovery stroke. A slight overextension that the Grandmaster compensated for with raw strength. The movements were beautiful, yes, but they were fighting against something. The blade itself. Ravi watched the third form, then the fourth. Each time, he saw the same problem. The balance point was wrong. Too far forward. It made the weapon powerful on the downward cut, but slow on the return. Any fast exchange would be difficult. The wielder would always be working harder than necessary. How had no one noticed this in 3,000 years? When Torvin completed the 5th form and lowered the blade, the hall filled with respectful silence. The Grandmaster's eyes swept across the assembled cadets. Questions. Several hands rose. Torvin answered queries about the history of the blade, the meaning of the symbols, the philosophy behind each form. Ravi kept his hand down, but his mind would not let the problem go. Finally, when the questions slowed, Ravi raised his hand. Torvin looked at him with something between curiosity and caution. "The human. Speak." Ravi stood. He could feel every eye in the room turning toward him. His heart beat faster, but the question demanded to be asked. "Grandmaster, with respect," he said carefully, "I noticed something about the blade's balance. The weight distribution seems to favor forward momentum at the cost of recovery speed. The balance point appears to be positioned for a longer reach than the forms require. Why was it designed that way?" The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone laughed. A Brunari cadet in the front row shook his head and muttered something to his neighbor. More quiet laughter rippled through the hall. Torvin did not laugh. His 4 eyes fixed on Ravi with an intensity that made the human want to sit back down. When the Grandmaster spoke, his voice was cold. "You are questioning the balance of a blade forged by the greatest smiths in galactic history? A weapon that has been studied and honored for 3,000 years. I am only asking why," Ravi said. "On Earth, we learned that understanding the reasons behind a design helps us appreciate it better. I meant no disrespect." "The blade is perfect," Torvin said. "Your confusion comes from ignorance of our traditions. Perhaps, in time, you will learn to see properly." He turned away, dismissing both the question and the human who asked it. the demonstration ended. Cadets filed out, many casting amused glances at Ravi as they passed. He heard whispers. The human who thought he knew better than 3,000 years of Keldari tradition. The newcomer who could not appreciate perfection, Commander Thara Nolan, found him outside the hall. She was the military attaché who had arranged his placement here, and her expression mixed sympathy with frustration. Ravi, she sighed. First day? You made it one demonstration before challenging their sacred weapons. I just asked a question. You just questioned something they have believed for longer than human civilization has existed. Ravi nodded slowly. But the question would not leave his mind. That night, long after the academy had grown quiet, Grandmaster Torvin returned to the Grand Hall alone. He stood before the case containing Aldrin's blade, his 4 arms crossed over his broad chest. Then, slowly, he lifted the ancient weapon. He assumed the first form, moving through the motions he had performed 10,000 times, and for the first time in decades, he paid attention to how the blade felt in his hands. Nobody wanted to sit near the human in the dining hall. Ravi carried his tray to an empty table in the corner and ate alone. It had been 3 days since the demonstration, and word had spread through the academy like fire. The newcomer from the deathworld had insulted the sacred blades. He had questioned Grandmaster Torvin himself. Some cadets looked at him with amusement. Others with open hostility. He understood their reaction. Humans were new to the coalition. They had no ancient traditions, no 1,000-year histories of honor. To these species, Earth's entire recorded history was barely a footnote. What right did a human have to question anything? But the question still burned in his mind. During afternoon training, Ravi kept to himself and practiced basic forms with a standard training blade. The weapon was designed for multiple species, which meant it fit nobody perfectly. Still, it moved the way a blade should move. Balanced. Responsive. When Ravi flowed through the European longsword techniques his grandfather had taught him, the blade followed his intentions without resistance. He noticed a pair of eyes watching him. Cadet Scylla stood at the edge of the training ground. She was Minovian, slender, and covered in iridescent scales that shifted color with her mood. Right now, they were a cautious gray-green. She had been in the hall during his question, sitting 3 rows ahead of him. When their eyes met, she looked away quickly. But she did not leave. Ravi finished his practice and began walking toward the equipment shed. Scylla intercepted him halfway. Your blade handling, she said quietly. It is different from what they teach us here. It is how my people learn to fight, Ravi said. Different problems required different solutions. Scylla's scales flickered with something that might have been curiosity. The question you asked. About the balance. I have wondered similar things. Ravi stopped walking. You have. The 5th form, Scylla said, her voice dropping even lower. My instructor says I perform it incorrectly, that I anticipate the recovery too quickly. But when I hold the practice blade, my body tells me the recovery should be faster. I thought the flaw was in me. What if the flaw is not in you? Scylla's scales flushed a brief orange of alarm. That would mean the forms themselves are flawed. That is impossible. They have been perfected over 3,000 years. Perfected for whom? The question hung between them. Scylla looked around nervously, then hurried away without another word. But Ravi had seen something in her eyes. Doubt. The same doubt that had kept him awake for 3 nights. That evening, Ravi visited the archives of lost peoples. It was a vast underground complex where the coalition stored knowledge from civilizations that had risen, flourished, and fallen. An old Varadi named Pelham served as its guardian. Pelham was not happy to see a human. The archives are for serious researchers, he said, his wrinkled face twisted with disapproval. Not for newcomer species who do not understand our ways. I am researching Keldari blade history, Ravi said. Specifically, the period when the sacred weapons were first forged. Why would a human care about such things? Ravi met the old archivist's eyes. Because I think something important has been forgotten. And forgotten things have a way of causing problems. Perhaps it was the seriousness in his voice. Perhaps Pelham was simply bored. Whatever the reason, the old Varadi led him into the depths of the archives. They walked past shelves containing the collected wisdom of dead civilizations. Weapons hung on walls, preserved in perfect condition, their wielders long gone to dust. Pelham noticed Ravi studying them. Each of these belonged to a species that no longer exists, Pelham said. The Trandori, the vessel mines of Keth, the singing warriors of Peloran, all gone. What happened to them? Pelham shrugged. Different causes. War, disease, environmental collapse. But they all shared one thing. They stopped adapting. They believed their ways were perfect and saw no need to change. He paused before a case containing a beautiful curved blade. The Trandori fought with these for 8,000 years. Same design, same techniques. When they faced an enemy who had spent those 8,000 years improving, they were slaughtered in a single generation. They reached a section dedicated to Keldari history. Pelham pulled out ancient documents, their pages preserved behind protective fields. The first sacred blades were forged during the reign of Aldrin, Pelham said. Here are the original specifications. Ravi studied the documents carefully. The measurements were precise. Blade length, weight distribution, balance point, everything recorded in perfect detail. Then he saw it. These measurements, Ravi said slowly, the arm length ratios. They do not match modern Keldari. Pelham leaned closer, his old eyes narrowing. What do you mean? The blades were designed for someone with longer arms and a different shoulder structure. Modern Keldari have evolved. They are shorter in the arm by almost 8%. Pelham was silent for a long moment. Then he began pulling out more documents, comparing them against modern Keldari physiology records. 3,000 years, Pelham whispered. The blades remained the same, but the Keldari changed. Generation by generation, so slowly no one noticed. They have been training with weapons that no longer fit their bodies, Ravi said. For 3,000 years, warriors have blamed themselves for struggling with the forms. But it was never their fault. Pelham looked at Ravi with new respect. How did you see what no one else saw? Ravi thought of his grandfather, of long afternoons learning the difference between a blade that served its wielder and a wielder who served the blade. Where I come from, he said, we learned to question everything. It was the only way to survive. Pelham led him deeper into the archives, to a sealed vault that few were permitted to enter. Weapons from fallen civilizations, the old archivist said as the door opened. Some species forgot how to question. That is why their blades are here, and they are not. Ravi looked at the silent weapons of the dead and understood the warning. Sparks flew in the darkness of the abandoned maintenance bay. Ravi worked by the light of a single lamp, his hands moving carefully over the practice blade clamped to his workbench. He had borrowed tools from the engineering department, claiming he needed them for a personal project. It was not entirely a lie. The blade before him was standard Academy issue, mass-produced, unremarkable, but in Ravi's hands, it was becoming something else. He had spent the last week calculating the adjustments needed to shift the balance point backward, to match the proportions of a modern Keldari body rather than an ancient one. A soft knock came at the door. Ravi tensed, then relaxed when he saw Scylla slip inside. You came, he said. I should not be here. Her scales were dark blue with anxiety. If anyone discovers what you are doing, we will both be expelled. Then we will not be discovered. Ravi lifted the modified blade and offered it to her. Try this. Scylla hesitated. Taking the weapon meant crossing a line she could never uncross. Questioning in her mind was one thing. Actively participating in changing a sacred weapon was something else entirely, but curiosity won over caution. She took the blade. The moment she assumed the first form, her eyes went wide. It feels different, she whispered. Try the full sequence. Scylla moved through the 5 sacred forms. Her movements, which had always been slightly hesitant on the recovery strokes, now flowed without interruption. The blade did not fight her. It followed her intentions as if it could read her thoughts. When she finished, she stood in stunned silence. The 5th form, she finally said. I have never completed it that smoothly. My instructors always said I recovered too quickly, but now the blade matches my timing. Your instructors were wrong, Ravi said. Your instincts were right. The blade was wrong. Scylla looked at the weapon in her hand as if seeing it for the first time. How did you know how to do this? Ravi pulled up a chair and sat down. The maintenance bay was cold, but neither of them noticed. On Earth, our ancestors made blades for thousands of years, he said. But unlike the coalition species, we never stopped changing them. The Japanese katana went through dozens of variations over 8 centuries. European swords evolved from short-stabbing weapons to long-cutting blades to specialized dueling tools. Every generation of smiths asked, how can we make this better? But why? Scylla asked. If something works, why change it? Because on Earth, Standing still means death. Ravi's voice grew quiet. Our world is dangerous. Predators evolved alongside us. Diseases mutated faster than we could cure them. The weather changed. The land shifted. The only way humans survived was by adapting faster than anything trying to kill us. We could not afford to believe anything was perfect. Perfect meant you stopped improving. And stopping meant dying. Scylla considered this. Her people lived on a gentle world with stable seasons and predictable patterns. They had achieved civilization through patience and tradition. The idea of a world that punished stillness was difficult to imagine. Your world sounds terrifying, she said. It made us who we are. Ravi took the blade back and examined it under the lamp. We learned to question everything. Not out of disrespect, but out of necessity. A blade that served our grandfather might not serve us. Techniques that worked against one enemy might fail against another. Tradition was valuable, but survival was more valuable. Over the following weeks, Ravi and Scylla met in secret. He modified more practice blades. She tested them, reporting her results. With each adjustment, her performance improved. Techniques that had always felt slightly awkward became natural. Her instructors noticed her rapid improvement, but could not explain it. One evening, Ravi explained the physics of balance points, using simple demonstrations with weighted rods. Scylla learned more about blade dynamics in 1 hour than she had in 2 years of academy training. Why do they not teach us this? She asked. Because they have forgotten that it matters, Ravi said. When you believe something is perfect, you stop looking at the details. You stop asking why. You just accept. Other cadets began to notice Scylla's improvement. She was rising through the training rankings faster than anyone expected. Whispers started. How was she suddenly so good? What was her secret? A Brennari cadet named Gorth was particularly suspicious. He had been ranked above Scylla since their first year. Now she was catching up to him, and his pride could not accept it. One night, Gorth followed Scylla. He watched her slip into the abandoned maintenance bay. He waited until she left, then broke in and searched the space that he found the modified blades that he found Ravi's notes, filled with calculations about weight distribution and balance points. And he understood exactly what the human had done. The next morning, Ravi was summoned to the office of the Academy Council. Four masters sat behind a long table, their expressions hard and unforgiving. Grandmaster Torvin stood to the side, his 4 arms folded, his face unreadable. On the table before them lay the modified blade, Ravi's notes, and the damning evidence of his secret work. Human, the chief counselor said, you stand accused of desecrating sacred tradition. You have altered weapons meant to honor our ancestors. You have corrupted a fellow cadet with your heresy. What do you have to say? Ravi looked at the blade on the table. He looked at Torvin, whose eyes revealed nothing. I have only one thing to say, Ravi replied. The blade works better now. The council chamber erupted in outrage, but Ravi noticed something. Torvin did not join the shouting. The old Grandmaster simply stared at the modified blade, his expression deeply troubled, because deep down, he already knew the human was right. The tribunal chamber had witnessed judgments for over 1,000 years. Stone benches rose in steep tiers around a central platform where the accused would stand. Ancient symbols covered the walls, representing justice, honor, and the sacred traditions of the warrior's path. Light fell from high windows, illuminating the dust that drifted through the air like the ghosts of those who had stood here before. Ravi walked to the central platform alone. The benches were filled with cadets, instructors, and masters who had come to watch. Many expected a quick judgment. The human had confessed. The evidence was clear. Expulsion and dishonor were certain. Commander Thara Nolan sat in the observers section, her face tight with worry. She had tried everything to prevent this trial. Nothing had worked. The 5 judges took their seats. Grandmaster Torvin stood to the side, his role as the primary witness giving him a special position in the proceedings. Ravi Dasgupta of Earth, the chief judge announced, you are charged with the desecration of sacred weapons and the corruption of academy traditions. How do you answer these charges? I modified practice blades to improve their function, Ravi said clearly. I taught a fellow cadet why those modifications worked. I do not consider this desecration. Murmurs swept through the chamber. The judges exchanged glances. The sacred weapons represent 3,000 years of perfection, another judge said. By your own admission, you believe you know better than 30 centuries of master smiths. This is arrogance beyond measure. Ravi took a breath. May I invoke the right of demonstration? Silence fell. The right of demonstration was an ancient law, older than the academy itself. It allowed an accused person to prove their case through action rather than words. Few ever invoked it because failure meant immediate conviction. The judges conferred quietly. Finally, the chief judge nodded. The right is granted. What demonstration do you propose? A contest, Ravi said. Cadet Scylla will wield the modified blade against your academy champion using a traditional weapon. If the traditional blade proves superior, I will accept any punishment. But if the modified blade performs better, I ask only that you consider whether perfection might still be improved. The chamber erupted in noise. Some called the proposal an insult. Others argued it was a fair test. The judges demanded order. Torvin stepped forward. His deep voice cut through the chaos. I will allow this. His four eyes fixed on Ravi. Bring forth the champion. A massive Keldari cadet named Borak descended from the benches. He was the finest blade fighter in the academy, undefeated in 37 matches. He looked at Scylla with the confidence of someone who had never known real challenge. Scylla entered the platform carrying the modified blade. Her scales were pale with fear, but her grip on the weapon was steady. First blood ends the match, Torvin announced. Begin. Borak attacked immediately. His blade moved in the first form, a devastating downward strike that had ended many duels in seconds. Scylla blocked and stepped sideways. The crowd leaned forward. Borak pressed his advantage. He was larger, stronger, more experienced. His blade work was technically perfect, each movement matching the sacred forms exactly. Any instructor watching would have seen flawless technique, but Scylla was not fighting his technique. She was fighting his blade, and his blade was fighting him. Every time Borak completed a cutting motion, his recovery took a fraction of a second too long. Not much, barely noticeable, but Scylla noticed. She flowed into each gap, her modified blade responding instantly to her intentions. The match stretched beyond what anyone expected. Borak grew frustrated. His attacks became more powerful but less controlled. Scylla remained calm, letting the blade guide her movements, trusting in the balance that felt as natural as breathing. Then Borak overextended on the fourth form. His blade swept wide, and the weight carried him slightly off-center. For a traditional opponent, it would have been a tiny advantage, quickly lost. Scylla was not traditional. Her blade flicked forward in a motion no sacred form had ever taught, a simple thrust born from pure instinct and a weapon that answered her will. The tip touched Borak's chest above his training armor. First blood. The chamber was absolutely silent. Borak stared at the small red mark on his chest, as if he could not understand what had happened. Then he looked at Scylla's blade, his expression shifting from confusion to something like horror. How? He whispered. Torvin walked slowly to the center of the platform. He took the modified blade from Scylla's trembling hands and held it before his eyes. Then, without a word, he assumed the first form. His movements were slower than during the demonstration. More careful, more aware. Every master in the chamber watched as the greatest living blade instructor performed the sacred techniques with a weapon that had been declared heresy. When he finished, Torvin stood motionless for a long moment. It fits, he said quietly. For the first time in decades, a blade truly fits my hands. He turned to the judges. His four arms hung at his sides, and in his eyes there was something no one had ever seen before, doubt. And beyond the doubt, the first terrible stirrings of understanding. This trial is suspended, Torvin announced. I must study this matter further. The chief judge began to protest, but Torvin silenced him with a look. I have taught blade combat for 200 years, the Grandmaster said. I have watched thousands of students struggle with the sacred forms. I blamed their weakness. I blamed their lack of dedication. I blamed everything except the one thing I never thought to question. His voice dropped. The blades themselves. He looked at Ravi with something that might have been respect. Come to my quarters tonight, human. We need to talk. Then he walked out of the chamber, carrying the modified blade, leaving behind a room full of people who had just watched their certainties begin to crumble. Torvin's quarters were not what Ravi expected. The rooms were simple. Stone walls, wooden furniture, a small shrine in one corner, holding medals and honors from 2 centuries of service. The only decoration was a single painting showing a young Keldari warrior, barely more than a child, holding his first blade. That was me, Torvin said, noticing Ravi's gaze. I was 12 years old. My master told me the blade was perfect, that if I trained hard enough, I would be worthy of it. He poured 2 cups of ritual tea and set one before Ravi. The human sat across from him at a low table, uncertain what to expect. I have felt it for decades, Torvin said quietly. The wrongness, the slight resistance in every movement. I thought I was growing old, losing my edge. I trained harder, pushed myself beyond my limits. I demanded perfection from my students because I could not find it in myself. He lifted his cup but did not drink. Do you know how many cadets I have failed over the years? How many young warriors I sent away in disgrace because they could not master the forms? I told them they lacked discipline. I told them they were not trying hard enough. His voice broke slightly. I never once considered that the fault might be in what I was teaching. Ravi sipped his tea, giving the old master time to compose himself. My grandfather taught me something, Ravi said. He said a blade should serve the hand that holds it. The moment the hand must serve the blade, something has gone wrong. A weapon is a tool. Tools must change as we change. Otherwise, they become chains. Torvin was silent for a long moment. Your grandfather sounds wise. He was a practical man. He believed tradition was valuable, but not more valuable than the people following it. Torvin rose and walked to the shrine. He removed one of his medals, the highest honor the Academy could bestow, and studied it in the light. I won this 60 years ago, he said. I defeated the greatest blade fighters of my generation. Everyone said I was perfect, but I remember the pain in my shoulders after every match, the strain in my arms that I hid from my instructors. I thought suffering was the price of mastery. He set the medal down. It was not mastery. It was endurance. I was fighting my own weapon every time I picked it up. He turned to face Ravi. Tomorrow, I am going to the Forge of Ancestors. I will request a new blade made to modern specifications. Will you come with me? The Forge of Ancestors was a sacred place where Kaldari weapons had been made for 3,000 years. The smiths who worked there were considered holy craftsmen, their techniques passed down through countless generations. When Torvin entered with a human at his side, the master smith nearly collapsed from shock. Grandmaster, the smith stammered, this is highly unusual. Many unusual things are happening today, Torvin replied. I require a new blade. Here are the specifications. He handed over a document containing Ravi's calculations. The smith read it, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror. These proportions are wrong, the smith said. They do not match the sacred designs. The sacred designs were made for people who no longer exist, Torvin said. Our ancestors were different from us. Taller, longer in the arm. The perfect blades they made were perfect for them, not for us. But the traditions were meant to serve our warriors. Instead, our warriors have been serving the traditions. Torvin's voice carried the weight of 200 years of authority. Make the blade. I will take responsibility. The smiths worked through the night. Word spread through the academy. By dawn, a crowd had gathered outside the forge, watching through the windows as something unprecedented took shape. Archivist Pelham arrived carrying ancient documents. He spread them before the gathering masters, showing the original forge specifications from 3,000 years ago alongside modern Kaldari physiology records. The evidence is clear, Pelham said. The human's analysis is correct. Our bodies have changed. Our weapons have not. Some masters rejected the evidence. They called it heresy, demanded the documents be destroyed. But others examined the records with growing understanding. They remembered their own struggles with the sacred forms. They remembered the unexplained aches, the techniques that never quite felt right. The sun rose. The forge fires dimmed. The master smith emerged carrying a blade that looked almost identical to the traditional design. Almost. The differences were subtle. A slight shift in the weight distribution. A minor adjustment to the grip angle. Nothing that dishonored the ancient patterns, but everything necessary to make the weapon serve its wielder. Torvin took the blade in his 4 hands. He assumed the first form. For a moment, nothing seemed different. Then he began to move. His body flowed through the techniques with a grace he had not felt in decades. The blade did not resist. It did not fight him. It became an extension of his will. When he completed the 5th form, there were tears in his ancient eyes. We have been carrying weights we did not need to carry, he said to the gathered masters. We blamed ourselves for weakness that was never ours. For 3,000 years, we honored our ancestors by making our children suffer. He raised the new blade to the morning light. No more. From this day forward, the blade serves the warrior, not the other way around. The crowd was silent. Then, slowly, one master stepped forward and asked the smiths to examine his own family blade. Then another, and another. By noon, the Forge of Ancestors was overwhelmed with requests. Blades that had been passed down for generations were being measured, analyzed, questioned for the first time. Ravi stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the change spread like ripples in still water. Commander Nolan found him there. "You started a revolution," she said. "I only asked a question," Ravi replied. "Sometimes that is all it takes." Word was spreading beyond the academy now. Other military institutions were asking for the humans' research. Other species were beginning to examine their own ancient weapons. Ravi had come to the academy to learn. Instead, he had taught an entire civilization to question what they thought they knew. And the questions were only beginning. 1 year had changed everything. The Grand Hall of Blades looked different now. The ancient weapons still hung on the walls, preserved and honored, but beside each one was a small display showing the original design specifications and the modern adaptations that had been developed. History was no longer just remembered. It was understood. Ravi walked through the hall with Archivist Pelham at his side. The old Virati moved slowly these days, but his eyes were brighter than ever. 47 species have requested consultations, Pelham said. Their delegations are arriving throughout the week. Some have traditions older than the Keldari. They are not happy about what you have started. Change is rarely welcomed, Ravi said, but it comes whether we welcome it or not. The exhibition hall was filling with representatives from across the coalition. Warriors in ceremonial armor stood alongside diplomats in formal robes. Some looked curious, others looked hostile. A group of Brenari warriors gathered in one corner, their expressions dark with suspicion. Grandmaster Torvin entered the hall to a standing ovation. The old master looked different now. He moved with a confidence that went beyond technique. For the first time in decades, his body and his blade were in harmony. He performed the 5 sacred forms with his new weapon. The movements were the same as they had always been, but somehow they were also more sharper, more alive. The blade sang through the air as if it was finally speaking the language it was meant to speak. When he finished, the applause was thunderous, but not everyone was clapping. The lead Brenari warrior stepped forward. He was called Draven, a hero of many battles, and his family's blade had been passed down for 400 generations. "Pretty demonstrations prove nothing," Draven said loudly. "My ancestors forged our blades with sacred fire and blessed them with warrior spirits. You asked me to insult their memory by questioning their work." The hall fell silent. This was the confrontation everyone had expected. Ravi stepped forward before anyone could stop him. "I would never insult your ancestors," he said calmly. "They created something remarkable. But may I ask you one question?" Draven's eyes narrowed. "Ask. When you wield your grandfather's blade and perform the 3rd form, does your shoulder ache afterward? A deep pain that you hide from your students and pretend does not exist?" The Brenari warrior went absolutely still. "That pain has been in my family for generations," he said slowly. "We considered it a badge of honor. The price of wielding a sacred weapon. What if it is not a price?" Ravi asked. "What if it is a message? Your body telling you that something is wrong. Not with you, with the blade." Draven stared at him for a long moment. Then he drew his ancestral weapon and held it before his eyes. It was a beautiful blade, dark metal etched with symbols of his lineage. He had carried it since he was old enough to lift it. "My grandfather had this same pain," he said quietly, "and his grandfather before him. We thought it meant we were not worthy." "You were always worthy," Ravi said. "The blade was not worthy of you." Draven was silent. Then, slowly, he extended the weapon toward Ravi. "Examine it. Show me what my ancestors could not see." The hall erupted in murmurs. For a Brenari to offer his ancestral blade to an outsider was unprecedented. But Ravi took the weapon carefully, respectfully, and began his analysis. Over the following hours, more delegations came forward. Species that had come to protest found themselves asking questions instead. Warriors who had suffered in silence for generations discovered that their pain had explanations. Traditions that had seemed eternal were revealed to be frozen moments in time. Perfect for people who no longer existed. Scylla found Ravi in the evening, standing alone by a window overlooking the academy grounds. She was an instructor now, the youngest in the academy's history. Her scales glowed with the warm gold of contentment. "You did not just fix blades," she said. "You taught us to see again." "I only asked questions," Ravi replied. "The answers were always there. You just needed permission to look for them. Why do humans do this? Why can you not simply accept things as they are?" Ravi smiled slightly. "Because our world never gave us that option. On Earth, the creatures that accepted things died out. The ones who questioned, who adapted, who refused to believe that anything was permanent, they survived. It is not wisdom. It is instinct. We question because we cannot imagine not questioning." Below them, cadets practiced with a mix of traditional and adapted weapons. Old techniques merged with new understanding. The academy was changing, slowly but steadily. "The coalition is older than human civilization," Scylla said. "Your species has been among the stars for only 40 years. Yet you have changed things that stood unchanged for millennia. Does that not frighten you?" Ravi considered the question. "What frightens me is the alternative. In the archives, there are weapons from species that no longer exist. Perfect weapons that were never improved. I look at those blades and I see what happens when you stop asking why." A message arrived on his communicator. Ravi read it and laughed softly. "The Galactic Coalition Council has requested a formal presentation. They want to understand why humans never stop questioning. They want to study our approach to tradition and adaptation." "What will you tell them?" "The truth. That we are not smarter than other species. We are not stronger or wiser or more noble. We are just afraid. Afraid of standing still. Afraid of believing we have found all the answers. Fear drove us across our planet, into our skies, and out to the stars. And it keeps us asking questions that everyone else forgot to ask." He turned from the window and walked toward the archives. There was still work to do. More weapons to examine. More traditions to question. More species to help see what they had been too close to notice. Pelham waited for him at the archive entrance. The old Virati gestured toward the vault of fallen civilizations. "Some species forgot how to question," Pelham said. "That is why their blades are here, and they are not." Ravi nodded and walked past the silent weapons of the dead. He had heard those words before, but now they carried a different weight. That humanity's greatest strength was not their deathworld bodies or their stubborn survival instincts. It was simpler than that. They never stopped asking why. And in a galaxy that had grown comfortable with ancient answers, that single question was enough to change everything.